The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the kind of self-important energy you'd expect from a room full of beings who'd never worked a real job in their lives. Crystalline spires stretched toward a dome that showcased the swirling nebulas of the Andromeda sector, because apparently even alien bureaucrats needed fancy ceiling art to feel superior. Admiral Vex'tar of the Kalaxian Empire adjusted his ceremonial battle sash and cleared his throat with the confidence of someone who'd read about war in textbooks but never actually fought one. His blue-scaled hide gleamed under the chamber's artificial lighting as he addressed the assembled delegates with all the gravitas of a middle manager, presenting quarterly reports. Esteemed council members. Vex'tar began, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for people who think using big words makes them sound smarter. We face a crisis of unprecedented magnitude. A single vessel from the primitive species known as humans has been systematically disrupting our most vital trade routes for the past 3 cycles. Council member QX, a blob-like creature from the Gelatin Nebula, quivered with what passed for concern among his species. Disrupting how, Admiral? Are they attacking merchant vessels? Worse, Vex'tar replied dramatically, because everything was dramatic when you had that many medals pinned to your chest. They're wandering, aimlessly. Their primitive navigation systems keep leading them into restricted space lanes. Yesterday, one of our luxury cruise liners had to alter course by a whole degree to avoid collision. The passengers were inconvenienced for nearly 4 minutes. The gasps that followed would have been impressive if they weren't coming from beings who considered a paper cut a medical emergency. This aggression cannot stand, declared Councillor Vex'tar from his floating platform, his tentacles writhing with manufactured outrage. What do we know about their military capabilities? Vex'tar consulted his holographic display with the practiced ease of someone who'd definitely not just made up most of his intelligence reports. Our xenobiologists classify them as a Type 2 civilization, barely above stone tools, really. They still use chemical propulsion and primitive metal alloys. Their largest warship wouldn't qualify as a cargo shuttle in our fleet. So we're talking about a minor pest control operation, mused Councillor Drexel, already mentally planning his post-mission celebration dinner. Precisely, Vex'tar agreed, puffing out his chest scales. I propose we dispatch a modest response force. Say, 500 of our finest warships should be more than sufficient to handle one primitive cargo vessel. The council erupted in approving chirps, clicks, and whatever noise QX made when he was pleased. Because nothing said measured response like sending half a battle fleet to deal with what amounted to an intergalactic wrong turn. Meanwhile, roughly 3 parsecs away, Captain Jake Murphy was having the kind of day that made him question his career choices. Again, his cargo hauler, the Lucky Break, was anything but lucky and desperately needed a break from breaking down every 5 minutes. Jake was the kind of guy who'd stumbled into space freight because Earth's job market was terrible and the space freight market was somehow worse. He had a face that suggested he'd been hit with every branch of the ugly tree, but had developed a sense of humor about it, and a personality that could best be described as aggressively optimistic in the face of cosmic indifference. Come on, baby, he muttered to his ship's navigation computer, which had been showing him the same error message for the past 6 hours. I know you're older than dirt and twice as reliable, but I really need to know where the hell we are. The nav computer responded by displaying a cheerful message that translated roughly to I have no idea, but isn't space pretty? Jake sipped his coffee, which had gone cold sometime during the previous solar system, and stared out at the star field that looked exactly like every other star field he'd seen in the past 3 months. Somewhere out there was Station Gamma 7, where he was supposed to deliver 40 tons of Earth's finest exports, the energy drinks that had expired during the Clinton administration and jerky of questionable origin. Well, he said to his empty cargo hold, because talking to yourself was a perfectly normal space freight tradition, at least it can't get any worse. In the history of the universe, those words have never once failed to immediately make everything worse. The first sign that Jake's day was about to get interesting came when his proximity alarm started screaming like a toddler in a toy store. The second sign was when his view screen filled with what appeared to be every spaceship that had ever been built, all pointed directly at him. Well, Jake said, setting down his coffee mug with the careful deliberation of a man who'd just realized he might not get to finish it. That's new. 500 Kalaxian warships hung in space like an angry metallic cloud, their hulls gleaming with the kind of advanced alloys that probably cost more than Jake's entire net worth. Each ship bristled with weapons that could level a small moon, and they were all aimed at his cargo hauler with the focused intensity of a cat watching a particularly stupid mouse. Admiral Vex'tar stood on his flagship's bridge, practically vibrating with anticipation. This was it, his moment of glory. The battle that would cement his reputation as the admiral who brought humanity to heel. He'd already composed 3 different victory speeches and was trying to decide which one made him sound more heroic. "Open communication channels," he commanded, his voice carrying across the bridge with the authority of someone who'd never been contradicted by anyone braver than a junior officer. The communication officer, a nervous creature who looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with an anxiety attack, began fiddling with his controls. "Channel open, Admiral. Attempting translation protocols." What came through the speakers was the electronic equivalent of a stroke. The translator, faced with the impossible task of converting human sarcasm into Kalaxian pomposity, simply gave up and started making random noises. "Primitive human vessel," Vex'tar announced, his words converted into what Jake's computer interpreted as an aggressive grocery list. "You have violated Galactic Council space. Surrender immediately or face the consequences." Jake's translation software, which had been programmed by the lowest bidder and functioned accordingly, turned this into something that sounded like an invitation to a potluck dinner with a side of vague threats about his mother. "Oh, hey there," Jake replied cheerfully, activating his external speakers. "You folks looking to trade? Because I've got some premium Earth merchandise here. Energy drinks that'll put hair on your, well, whatever you use for hair. And jerky. Made from, let's call it beef and leave it at that." The translator took Jake's friendly sales pitch and turned it into what the Kalaxians heard as a detailed psychological warfare manifesto, complete with threats involving mysterious Earth weapons called energy drinks and the implied consumption of sentient beings. Vex'tar's scales turned a darker shade of blue, which in Kalaxian body language meant either extreme anger or severe indigestion. "He mocks us. He speaks of consuming our flesh and feeding us mysterious stimulants." "Admiral," whispered his tactical officer, a creature who'd actually read the intelligence reports and was starting to have doubts. "Perhaps the translation matrix is malfunctioning?" "Nonsense," Vex'tar snapped. "This is clearly advanced human intimidation tactics. They're trying to break our morale before the battle even begins." Jake, meanwhile, was getting excited about his first potential customers in months. He activated his cargo bay displays, showing off crates of expired Red Bull and bags of jerky that looked like they'd been prepared by someone who'd heard about meat preparation secondhand. "Look at this quality," he announced, holding up a can that was probably older than some of the alien officers watching him. "Earth's finest. I'll give you the friends and family discount." The aliens watched in horror as Jake enthusiastically displayed what they interpreted as biological weapons and torture devices. The jerky, in particular, looked like it could violate several Geneva conventions that hadn't even been written yet. "He's showing us his arsenal," gasped the communications officer. Those storage containers could be filled with anything. Chemical weapons, biological agents, or worse, expired consumables." Vex'tar had heard enough. This human was clearly more dangerous than intelligence had suggested. Time for a show of force. Fire a warning shot across their bow. Let them see what real firepower looks like. The gunner, who was having the kind of day where nothing seemed to go right, accidentally targeted their own flagship instead of the empty space next to Jake's ship. The resulting explosion took out their primary communications array and made the Admiral's victory speeches temporarily moot. While Jake observed, watching pieces of alien technology drift past his view screen. That seems like poor planning. Jake had been in enough sticky situations to recognize when things were about to go from potentially profitable to definitely fatal. The sight of 500 alien warships, one of which had just blown up its own communications equipment, suggested this was one of those times. "Okay, Jake," he muttered, running through his options like a man reviewing a very short menu. "You've got a cargo hauler held together with duct tape and optimism. facing off against the alien equivalent of the entire U.S. Navy. Time to get creative. The thing about being a space freight hauler was that you learned to fix problems with whatever you had on hand. Broken hyperdrive? Use spare parts from the coffee maker. Navigation computer acting up? Percussive maintenance was a valid repair technique. Hostile alien fleet trying to vaporize you? Well, that was just Tuesday with extra steps. Jake's ship wasn't designed for combat, but it was designed for the kind of industrial work that required serious equipment. His mining laser could cut through asteroid rock like butter, and his cargo manipulator arms were strong enough to move containers the size of city blocks. Not exactly military grade, but then again, military grade usually just meant built by the lowest bidder. Computer, redirect power from life support to the mining array, Jake commanded, because when you're about to die anyway, fresher air seemed like a luxury. The Kalaxian fleet, meanwhile, was demonstrating the kind of tactical brilliance that came from years of fighting simulated battles against predictable opponents. They formed up in their textbook perfect formation, the dreaded claw of supremacy, which looked impressive in training simulations and had never actually been tested against anyone crazy enough to fight back. Admiral Vex'tar, now communicating through hand signals since his communications array was scattered across 3 solar systems, ordered the traditional pincer movement. 250 ships would approach from each side, trapping the human vessel in a classic no-escape scenario. What Vex'tar hadn't counted on was that Jake had spent years navigating asteroid fields where predictable meant dead. The moment he saw the aliens forming up in their pretty patterns, he knew exactly what to do. "You know what your problem is?" Jake announced over his still-functioning comm system, not that the aliens could understand him through their broken translator. "You guys fight like you learned strategy from a cookbook. Age 1, arrange ships in intimidating formation. Age 2, close and slowly while giving the enemy time to panic. Page 3, wonder why nothing worked." Jake fired his mining laser, not at the alien ships, but at a chunk of space debris left over from their communications array explosion. The laser cut the debris into dozens of smaller pieces, which Jake then grabbed with his cargo manipulators and hurled at the incoming fleet with the enthusiasm of a pitcher who'd been waiting all season for this moment. The aliens, expecting sophisticated energy weapons and tactical missiles, were completely unprepared for the psychological warfare of being pelted with chunks of their own equipment. Ships started breaking formation as pilots tried to avoid the improvised projectiles. Maintain formation. Vex'tar signaled frantically from his backup bridge. "It's just debris. We're warships of the Kalaxian Empire." That's when Jake demonstrated the difference between military precision and industrial practicality. He dumped his cargo containers into space, 40 tons of expired energy drinks and questionable jerky, and used them as improvised shields while maneuvering between the alien ships like he was threading a needle the size of Texas. The alien formation, designed for maximum intimidation and minimum flexibility, became a liability as ships tried to adjust their approach. The port wing collided with the starboard wing in a spectacular display of physics meeting poor planning. Did these guys learn strategy from a cookbook? Jake wondered aloud, watching 2 more alien ships ram into each other while trying to perform what looked like a synchronized swimming routine. Because if they did, somebody needs to write a better cookbook. The Kalaxians had spent so long fighting battles on paper that they'd forgotten the first rule of actual combat: the enemy gets a vote. And Jake was voting for chaos with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally found something he was good at. What started as a simple pest control operation was rapidly becoming the kind of military disaster that would be studied in alien war colleges for generations, assuming there were any survivors left to do the studying. Jake's cargo containers, now drifting through space like the galaxy's most dangerous litter, had created a debris field that turned the aliens' perfect formation into a 3-dimensional game of pinball. Ships were breaking off left and right, trying to avoid collisions with containers full of expired Red Bull that probably violated several laws of physics just by existing. "This is Battle Group 7, came a panicked transmission through the aliens' backup communications. "We're caught in some kind of food-based minefield, requesting immediate assistance." Admiral Vex'tar, who was beginning to suspect that his intelligence reports might have been somewhat inaccurate, was about to respond when space lit up with the arrival of reinforcements. 200 additional Kalaxian warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, ready to join what their commander assumed was a glorious victory in progress. Unfortunately, Commander Vex'tar had graduated from the same military academy as Vex'tar, which meant he had the same tactical flexibility as a brick wall and twice the ego. He also had a long-standing rivalry with Vex'tar that dated back to an incident involving a disputed parking spot at the officers' club and a ceremonial sword that was supposedly only for decoration. Admiral Vex'tar. Vex'tar announced over the comm, his voice carrying the kind of smugness reserved for people who show up late to parties and expect to be thanked for it. I see you're having some difficulty with a single primitive vessel. Perhaps you'd like to step aside and let a real commander handle this situation. Jake, meanwhile, was watching the new arrivals with the fascination of someone witnessing a car accident in slow motion. "Oh, this is getting good," he muttered, grabbing a bag of his questionable jerky for what was shaping up to be better entertainment than anything on Earth TV. Vex'tar's response to his rival's arrival was about as diplomatic as expected from someone whose battle plan had just been derailed by expired beverages. "Commander Vex'tar, this is my operation. Return to your patrol sector immediately." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Vex'tar replied with the tone of someone who was absolutely going to do exactly what he wasn't supposed to do. "The Galactic Council gave me emergency authorization to intervene if you proved inadequate." Jake watched in amazement as the two alien fleets began positioning themselves for what looked less like a coordinated military operation and more like the galaxy's most expensive custody battle. Ships that should have been focusing on him were instead maneuvering to block each other's firing solutions. "Are you guys seriously having a turf war right now?" Jake asked over the comm, not that anyone could understand him. "Because I've got to tell you, your timing is terrible. Although from my perspective, it's actually pretty great." The situation deteriorated further when Vex'tar decided to demonstrate superior tactics by ordering his fresh fleet to execute the Talon of Inevitable Victory, which was essentially the same formation Vex'tar had been using, but with more dramatic naming conventions. The result was predictable in the way that most disasters are predictable in hindsight. 700 alien warships, all trying to execute sophisticated battle maneuvers in the same limited space. While their commanders argued over who was in charge, and Jake continued to use industrial equipment in ways that would void every warranty in the galaxy. "You know," Jake observed, watching alien ships crash into each other with increasing frequency, "I'm starting to think you folks might want to work on your communication skills. And your depth perception. Definitely your depth perception." The debris field was growing exponentially as damaged alien ships leaked atmosphere, hull plating, and what Jake assumed were very expensive pieces of military hardware. His cargo hauler, designed to operate in hazardous industrial environments, navigated through the chaos like a dolphin swimming through a hurricane, while the aliens' warships tried to avoid bumping into each other. "This is Commander Vex'tar to all vessels," came the increasingly desperate transmission. "Ignore Admiral Vex'tar's orders and follow my tactical commands." "This is Admiral Vex'tar to all vessels," came the equally desperate response. "Ignore Commander Vex'tar completely and maintain current positions." Jake shook his head in amazement. "I've seen custody battles over alimony that were less petty than this." By the time Jake realized his ship was actually taking damage, roughly half of the alien fleet had already taken themselves out of commission through a combination of friendly fire, collision avoidance gone wrong, and what appeared to be an increasingly heated argument conducted through explosives. His cargo hauler's hull was peppered with small holes from debris impacts, and his life support system was making the kind of noises that suggested it was considering early retirement. But Jake had learned something valuable during this whole mess. Alien technology might be advanced, but it was also surprisingly fragile when you threw expired energy drinks at it hard enough. "Computer, scan the alien communication frequencies," Jake commanded, because if there was one thing his years in space freight had taught him, it was that someone always forgot to secure their network. His ship's basic scanning equipment, designed primarily for finding valuable asteroids and debris fields, turned out to be surprisingly effective at finding poorly secured alien communication networks. Apparently, when you were part of a highly advanced civilization, Cybersecurity became someone else's problem. Well, would you look at that? Jake mused as his scanner displayed the Kalaxian fleet's entire communication network like a roadmap. You folks really need to talk to your IT department. This is less secure than my grandmother's email account. What Jake found in the alien communications was better than any reality TV show Earth had ever produced. Private messages between commanders, personal complaints about superiors, and what appeared to be an ongoing gambling pool about whose fault the current disaster was. Admiral Vex'tar to command, situation under control. Minor delays due to unexpected human tactics. Commander Zikral to his staff, Vex'tar is an incompetent fool. His scales smell like rotted fish, and his battle plans were written by someone who learned strategy from children's picture books. Personal log. Engineering Officer Nectar, Day 847 of this mission. And I'm beginning to think Admiral Vex'tar couldn't find his own tail with both hands and a detailed map. Jake's damaged translation software, still functioning despite everything, was having the time of its digital life converting alien gossip into something approaching human entertainment. Oh, this is too good to keep to myself, Jake announced, and began broadcasting the aliens' private communications back to their entire fleet over their own communication network. The effect was immediate and spectacular. As crews heard what their commanders really thought of each other, and officers discovered their superiors' unflattering opinions of their competence, the already chaotic situation devolved into something that could best be described as mutiny with extra steps. Attention alien fleet, Jake broadcast, his voice carrying over every communication channel simultaneously. This is Captain Jake Murphy of the cargo vessel Lucky Break. I'd like to thank you all for the most entertaining afternoon I've had since that incident with the space pirates and the disco ball. Your commanders have been very educational about the importance of honest communication. Ships began peeling away from the formation as crews decided that following orders from commanders who thought they were idiots wasn't worth the risk of getting blown up by thick, expired beverage containers. Admiral Vex'tar, realizing that his carefully planned operation had become a public relations nightmare of galactic proportions, made one final desperate attempt to salvage his reputation. All vessels, ignore previous communications and focus fire on the human ship. Commander Zikral, not to be outdone in the desperation department, countermanded this immediately. Delay that order. All vessels withdraw to safe distance and regroup. Jake watched the alien fleet tear itself apart as ships received contradictory orders while their crews listened to increasingly embarrassing personal communications being broadcast fleet-wide. You know what, folks? Jake announced cheerfully as he began plotting a course out of the system. I think I'm going to call this a successful first contact. Really learned a lot about your culture today. Mainly that you should probably invest in better therapy and communication workshops. As Jake's cargo hauler limped away from what remained of the Kalaxian fleet, the aliens were too busy dealing with mass resignations, dueling commanders, and the kind of organizational breakdown that would require months of sensitivity training to resolve. 6 months later, the Galactic Council chambers had never been quieter. The kind of quiet that comes after someone asks an uncomfortable question at a family dinner, and everyone suddenly finds their food very interesting. Admiral Vex'tar, whose ceremonial battle sash now looked more like a participation trophy, stood before the assembled council with the posture of a man who'd recently discovered that resume padding has consequences. So Councillor Vex'tar said slowly, his tentacles performing what might charitably be called nervous fidgeting. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You deployed 500 warships, plus 200 reinforcements against a single human cargo vessel. Yes, sir, Vex'tar replied, staring at a spot on the wall that had suddenly become fascinating. And the result was 700 ships damaged or destroyed, with 0 human casualties. That's technically accurate, sir. The silence stretched on like a bad joke that nobody wanted to be the first to laugh at. Finally, Councillor Drexel cleared his throat with the delicacy of someone approaching a live explosive. What exactly happened out there, Admiral? Vex'tar consulted his official report, which had been carefully edited to remove references to expired energy drinks, space jerky, and the fact that most of his fleet had been defeated by industrial equipment and poor communication skills. The human vessel demonstrated unprecedented tactical superiority, he read in the tone of someone reciting a grocery list. Their commander employed advanced psychological warfare techniques and weapons systems previously unknown to our intelligence services. The engagement revealed significant gaps in our understanding of human military capabilities. What the report didn't mention was that Jake Murphy was currently halfway across the galaxy, still trying to deliver his original cargo to Station Gamma 7, completely unaware that he'd become the most feared human in Galactic Council space. The Lucky Break limped through hyperspace with the kind of mechanical wheeze that suggested it was held together through sheer stubbornness and possibly prayer. Jake sat in his pilot's chair, sipping coffee that had somehow gotten even worse during the alien encounter, reviewing his delivery schedule. "Computer, any word from Station Gamma 7 about our cargo delivery?" he asked. Message received, his ship's AI announced in its cheerfully oblivious tone. Station Gamma 7 reports they no longer require delivery. All staff have been evacuated due to security concerns in the sector. Jake frowned. Security concerns? What kind of security concerns? Message indicates increased human military activity has made the region unsafe for normal commerce. Human military activity? Jake looked around his empty cargo hold, with its dented walls and jury-rigged repairs. What human military activity? There's just me out here. Meanwhile, back at Galactic Council headquarters, emergency sessions were being called to address what intelligence reports were calling the human threat. Fleets were being repositioned. Defense budgets were being tripled. Military academies were frantically rewriting their tactical manuals to account for unconventional human warfare strategies. And through a comedy of bureaucratic errors, miscommunications, and the kind of assumptions that happen when nobody wants to admit they don't know what's going on, Jake Murphy found himself officially listed as Earth's primary diplomatic representative to the Galactic Council. The notification reached Earth's actual government about 3 weeks later, in the form of an ornate diplomatic packet that nobody quite knew what to do with. So the Secretary of State said, examining the alien documents, "Apparently we have an ambassador to the Galactic Council. A cargo hauler named Jake Murphy. Anyone know this guy?" Nobody did, but since interstellar diplomacy was above their pay grade anyway, they filed the paperwork and made a note to look into it when the budget allowed. Jake, meanwhile, had finally found a new cargo job. Something about delivering mining equipment to a frontier colony. Simple, straightforward work. What could possibly go wrong? As the Lucky Break jumped to hyperspace, its cargo hold filled with perfectly legitimate mining equipment that definitely wasn't going to accidentally start another interstellar incident, did. Jake settled back in his pilot's chair and smiled. "You know what, computer? I'm starting to think this whole space freight business might finally be turning around." In the distance, 3 different alien civilizations were quietly rerouting their trade ships to avoid any system that might possibly contain humans, while their intelligence services worked overtime trying to figure out Earth's true military capabilities. But Jake didn't know any of that. He was just a guy with a cargo hauler, a sense of humor, and the kind of luck that made the universe a more interesting place. Even if he didn't know it yet.